Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do a Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading, talk about any books I've finished, what I have ongoing, any big bookish news out in the world, and just anything else I found interesting because, hey, it's my channel. I can really talk about whatever I want. The first thing I want to mention is thank you to everybody who wished us a happy Thanksgiving. I fell behind on comments over the weekend. I didn't manage to post a Friday Reads video last week because of the holiday, and I sort of recognized as we were approaching the day that it wasn't going to happen. So I just kind of planned to publish a video on that day instead and kind of teased what it was going to be. It was the 100 times notable books for 2022. And I'll have links to that video and some of my other recent ones down below if you would like to check them out. So at least I feel good that I had a video to post on Saturday once I realized that I wasn't going to be able to do a Friday Reads. But I feel bad whenever I miss a Friday Reads because the people who watch them really consistently, frequently comment about how they like the routine of having one. So I'm sorry that there wasn't one, but I'm glad that I had something else to offer you instead. Quick question. So I posted a tease, which was the image that went in the background of the thumbnail that went with that video, and it was all the books. And I said, if you know what these books have in common, you know what the video is. At least two people had guessed that I was talking about the NPR big books list, and they were so enthusiastic about it that I feel bad that I haven't done that. So is that something you'd be interested in? Let me know down below, and I can try to squeeze it in the month of December. I was originally thinking I don't want to do a whole lot of videos about like the notable lists, the best of lists, even though I love them, because I just don't want to drown people with a bunch of similar content. But if that's something that you would be interested in, let me know and I'll try to fit it in. So leave a comment, let me know. And just in general, thank you. Thanksgiving is a weird holiday because of the history, and you know, it stands for kind of troubling things about American history. But I love any holiday that involves food and family and togetherness and all that, and we talked about that a bit in our November wrap-up that I did with Joel, and that is going to be linked down below as well. I love that y'all love when Joel appears so much because I love having him on, so thank you for that as well. But they're just really nice comments, and if I did not respond to you, I appreciate it, and I hope you had a great holiday as well if you celebrate, because again, it can be a bit of a weird holiday. Holidays in general can be weird. The next thing before we get into the big topic I want to talk about before we get into Friday Reads is the t-shirt that I'm wearing. Only Pride, No Prejudice. This is a t-shirt I had been looking out for months, actually, since May or June. And it comes from a bookstore called Betty's Pages. You can actually see their store name right there. They are in Michigan, and you might remember if you follow along that I did a curated book box from them back in June because I wanted to try another curated book box after the success I had with the first one that I did this year. And I wanted to do one during Pride Month that it comes from a queer-owned bookstore. This is a design that they had phased out because it was a limited edition one from, I think, last year. And there was just so much demand that they eventually decided that they would do it with a different color. And actually, I like this color better. It is currently listed as sold out on their website, but I'll link their website down below if you want to browse. They do have some really nice t-shirts, even if this one's not available. Or you can do what I did and just keep watching and keep an eye out for when they eventually have it in stock again, because I really like this shirt. They did a different literary themed one for June this year that's a top hat, like the Mad Hatter hat that says "We're all queer here." So I just kind of wanted the Jane Austen reference, so I waited for this one to come back. But so that will be down below as well if you would like to check it out. If you know me, you know I love bookstore t-shirts, so I'm happy to have this one. And I love that it's an Austen reference. I love that it's a queer pride reference. Love all of that. So the only other thing I want to talk about before we get into the Friday Reads portion of this video, I did finish 2 books this week and I'm working on one more, it's ongoing, is that I got a comment from someone about Demon Copperhead, actually, which is one of the books that I have been reading. I have a copy right here. And they were pointing out, I hadn't made the connection, but Demon Copperhead is a HarperCollins title. there are 250 HarperCollins employees who are on strike and have been on strike since, I believe, the beginning of November for fair pay and other benefits and things like that. So the person commented and said, this is a HarperCollins title. They're asking for a social media blackout, so, you know. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I hadn't made the connection between Demon and Copperhead and HarperCollins. That's on me. But I'm of two minds here. Because on the one hand, I worked in publishing, and I don't think you have to have worked in publishing to really sympathize with people who are on strike and are just asking to be paid fairly. But I worked in publishing. I know what the pay situation is like. And part of why we left New York was that I wasn't making enough money to live in New York, and part of that involved leaving publishing because I wasn't making enough money to support myself. It's hard, and that is a reality. So I want people who work in publishing to be paid fairly. That is very true. And I'm going to link 2 articles about the strike down below so you can seek out more information about it. And I still have friends who work in publishing. I don't want to speak for them, but you know, it's a job that people go into because they have a passion for publishing and for books, and they want to support that. And those people deserve to be paid fairly. In an NPR article that I'm going to link down below, it mentions that according to a recent statement, the average salary for HarperCollins employees is $55,000. The minimum salary is $45,000. So yeah, big company, but at the same time, the average salary is not that much higher than the minimum salary. And that's kind of the reality of working in publishing, and it shouldn't necessarily be that way. And a Vulture article that I'm also going to link down below kind of points out that the pay increase that these 250 employees are asking for is less than a conservative imprint of HarperCollins paid for Jared Kushner's 2022 book advance. So obviously, I would rather see that money getting put back into HarperCollins' employees than go to Jared Kushner and a ridiculous book advance for what I would say is a ridiculous book that probably shouldn't exist, because that person shouldn't have any more of a platform than he already has. But that's my opinion. So obviously I want to support that. At the same time, I don't want to hurt Barbara Kingsolver. A lot of work went into this book. She's a great author. I really want this book to be building buzz. To me, I would love to see this win a Pulitzer Prize next year. I don't want this book to be shut out of any conversation just because it comes from HarperCollins. And I think other people agree, because the Washington Post named this one of their 10 best books of the year. The New York Times named it one of their top 10 books of the year. That's a reality. I don't want to take money and success away from Barbara Kingsolver. And more significantly, I don't want to take money away from independent bookstores when we're in the middle of the holiday season and they're trying to survive actively. The holiday season is when most bookstores make the bulk of their money. And this in particular is an expensive book. So it's, I think, $32. It's $32.50 in the US. It's $40.50 in Canada. So it's also a great book. So if somebody wants to buy this book for themselves from an independent bookstore, and I really hope that they would buy it from an independent bookstore, or if they want to buy this as a gift for someone else, I think they would enjoy it. And they would support an independent bookstore that's trying to survive. I'm not going to tell somebody not to support an independent bookstore. So that's where I'm really torn about this whole situation. And I actually texted a friend who works in a bookstore and asked them about it. And they basically, like, bringing the conversation down to like a bullet point, said, it's fine. Talk about the book, do your review of it, and share your enthusiasm for it. It's fine. So I think basically what I can do is just talk more about like the strike and what's going on and let you know about it. And I'll put the 2 articles down below and you can seek out more information for yourself. And I'll try a little harder to bring up the strike when I talk about this. Again, it's on me. I didn't even notice that this is a Harper title when I was bringing it up. And ultimately, I think there are other things that will be more impactful for the people who are on strike. I think it was reported 2 days ago that literary agents are banding with the striking employees and saying that they will not take their books and authors to HarperCollins for bidding. So basically, they'll cut HarperCollins out of potential new books unless the people on strike get what they want. Like, I feel like that's something that's going to really move the needle. That's a good thing that could probably have a measurable impact on the strike. But I'm just a dude. I am not a labor negotiator. I'm not an activist or any of that. So at the end of the day, I guess I don't really know. But I will try to bring that back up whenever I talk about Demon Copperhead in the future. And let's move away from that into the actual Friday Reads portion of the video. And let's just start with Demon Copperhead, because it's an ongoing thing that I have been reading. I made some progress over the last week since I talked to you last. I have not finished, and I still have a long way to go in the book, but I am still loving it. I think I'm halfway through at this point, yes. Loving it, loving it, loving it, loving it. This is, that's where, again, I don't want to take anything away from this book. It's fantastic. I think anybody who picks this up will probably be liking it as much as I do. The enthusiasm that I've been hearing from people on the channel is just as high as mine for this book. And a lot of people have been really excited to pick it up. And, at the end of the day, I can put the book in front of you. It's up to you to decide if you want to make that purchase. Because, again, this is an expensive book. $32.50 for a hardcover is pricey. Not everyone will be able to afford that. Hopefully, your library will have a copy if that is the case. And I imagine the wait list will be long, but eventually it'll come around. And, that is a valid option as well. Point just being, I'm still reading this, still loving it. I prioritized the two books that I finished that I was listening to on audio over the physical book, and I'm really hoping now to pivot back to this. So the two books that I finished were both audios, and the first one is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. I have been doing this as a buddy read with Erica from The Broken Spine. I'll have a link to her channel in the description box down below. The story for this is that I did a bookshelf tour not that long ago and pointed to Jane Eyre on the shelf and said that I haven't read it, even though I've had this copy for like 20 years. Erica reached out saying that it's one of her favorite books, if not her favorite book, and she offered up a buddy read, so I decided to do it. It fits in with one of the prompts that I'm doing to finish off the Montana Book Company's reading challenge for 2022. This is a book that I have been intimidated to read on my own, so I put it in for that prompt. And I'm still marinating on the end. I had fallen behind because of Thanksgiving, so I put a big push on the audio to get caught up and then to finish the book. So I actually finished it on the last day of November. And I really like the parts of this book that don't deal with Rochester, which is a funny thing to say because so much of this book deals with Rochester. And that's a conversation I've been having with Erica a lot. And she is still working through the book. I kind of raced to the finish line. And we had agreed that because she's read it before that I would go on ahead. So I did. And there are a lot of parts of this book that I love. I love the opening where Jane is staying with her aunt. I love the part where she goes to the Lowood School. I love when she's getting situated as a governess. And I love when she leaves and has another adventure later in the book. And it's everything with Rochester is where this book, I wouldn't say goes off the rails, but where I have more complicated feelings about it because I just don't like Rochester at all. There are interesting things going on, and Erica has been great about like reining me in a little bit and saying like, all right, well, think about Rochester this way. And that has been helpful. But so ultimately, I see why this would be somebody's favorite book. It's not mine, but there are a lot of things I really appreciate in here and how Jane is allowed to be a complicated character, someone who really tries to be ethical and moral and is pretty unshakable from what she thinks is right, no matter what the circumstances are. I deeply appreciate that about her. I like that this is a very feminist book in ways both subtle and not. And I love all of that stuff. So I'm trying to sit with this book and digest a little bit to figure out exactly where I end up on it, because every time Rochester came into the book, I was like instantly rolling my eyes. And that's the way it is. So I'm going to continue sitting with this, and as Erica works through the rest of the book, we'll continue talking about it, but I am done. And I'm glad I read it, especially since I've had this book for 20 years, roughly, at this point. So I'm glad I finally read it. I had never read a Brontë book at all by any of the Brontes, so at least now I can say I've read one. And I'm going to continue thinking about it as we move away from it. Once that was done, I decided to quickly get another book that's I'm doing for my reading challenge for Montana Book Company out of the way. I think in the video that I did where I talked about how I'm planning to check off all of those remaining prompts that I have, I'll link that video down below. I mentioned that there was a prompt that I had originally been planning to do, The Feather Thief, Beauty, Obsession, and the Natural History Heist of the Century by Kirk Wallace Johnson. That prompt was for a true crime book, and I don't like standard true crime about like murders and things like that for various reasons. We don't necessarily have to get into them now, but I feel like they often sensationalize the person who commits the crime and at the expense of the victim and the victim's families and things like that. This was a way of doing a true crime book that skirted that issue. A lot of people had really great suggestions for true crime books that I could do, and I was considering all of them. The problem was I had a hold on this book that looked like it wasn't going to come through before the end of the year. And then, over last weekend, I got a notification from Libby saying that this was available, inexplicably. Don't know how that happened. There were a bunch of people ahead of me. There was no reason for me to expect that it would be available in 2022, but it was. So I did it. And now I'm done with the true crime prompt, and I feel bad because I got so many great suggestions from people. So thank you and sorry. But I did this, and I finished it. I finished it really quickly. I started it and was done the next day. It just happened that with my work schedule, I was able to kind of power through sections of it during the day. And if you are unfamiliar, so this book tells the story of a heist at a British, I'm forgetting what museum it was, but it was a British museum where they had lots of old birds. And the book goes back and tells the story of how those birds were collected as specimens by a man named Wallace, who I don't believe is any relation to the author, but who was a colleague of Darwin's in a way and had ideas in his studying of animals and his explorations and collecting of specimens. And he wrote Darwin a letter that was onto the theory of evolution, and Darwin had been quietly working on that, so he kind of rushed to publish it. And how those collections ended up in a museum. And so this person stole a bunch of them and sold them on the black market and used some of the feathers, like took the feathers off of the birds and used them in fly tying, like fly fishing, because he had become obsessed with it. And a lot of these feathers aren't available anymore because over time, like birds and plumage became a huge part of the fashion world and people were obsessed with it. And as that became such a rage, bird population really dwindled, sometimes to the point of extinction, sometimes to the point of near extinction. So a lot of the birds that were collected and were specimens in this museum are now, you're not allowed to hunt them or to collect feathers from them. They're protected. So oddly, within the first half of the book, the perpetrator of the crime is committed. You have the backstory of where these birds came from, what their significance in history is, and how fashion came in and made them popular, and now why they're not widely available on marketplaces now. And then you also have the story of how the perpetrator was caught and what their trial was. That all happens in the first half of the book. So when the trial ended, I was thinking, what is left to do in this book? That's interesting. And that's actually where the book really took off, because then somebody else, the author, gets involved in the story, because after the trial is over and the perpetrator just gets a slap on the wrist, basically, the author gets involved and tries to help track down the remaining skins or remaining birds out there. And it's an interesting conundrum because the museum is no longer interested in recovering these birds or the skins because they're essentially useless now. They've been cut up. Like their purposes for science are now completely just gone. And the police are not interested in this either because the perpetrator admitted guilt and was put on trial, and that part's done, so they don't have the resources to track down anything, especially since the museum doesn't care. So the author gets involved and starts trying to track them down. And what the book turns into is a sort of meditation on right and wrong. And it's interesting because this case in particular fell through the cracks because people didn't quite understand the stakes and what was stolen. In reality, these birds and their skins were priceless from a scientific perspective, and they have been used in really interesting and important ways. For example, through eggs that were specimens that they'd have from all these years before and through time leading up to the present day, they were able to measure the amount of mercury in the eggs, which allows them to make inferences about the level of mercury in the water. And they can see that over time, as the mercury level increased, the shells got thinner, which meant that the eggs were more likely to not survive. And that has huge implications, obviously, for the environment. So you can't do that anymore when you don't have these specimens. So essentially, these were priceless items that were taken, but because they're bird skins and the stuffed birds, people didn't understand what it was. And at the same time, the community of people who are in the fly fishing community didn't understand that, but they also kind of didn't care. Like, they were very callous about what the birds were used for, whether or not the museum was even using them at all. They just kind of assumed like this corporate monolith has control of these and they shouldn't. Why are we not able to have access to these things? We should be able to, because they're unable to see beyond their obsession, which is their hobby essentially, or in many cases it does become their career. And it's also a meditation on how people justify the bad things that they do. Both the perpetrator and the other people in the fly fishing community, and again, not all fly fishers, but the people who are interviewed in the book really don't see why this was such a bad thing. Ultimately, a lot of people who purchased the skins don't return them after it is revealed that they were stolen. And it becomes a really interesting ethical conundrum, especially since, again, the museum doesn't care about getting the birds back because at this point they're useless. The police don't care about tracking anything down. Nobody understands the value of this other than essentially the author at this point. And so it was a really interesting book. I thought it was just fine in the first half of the book. And then when it got into all that heavier stuff, I enjoyed it a lot more. So I am glad I got to read it. I'm glad it became available in 2022. And it's definitely the type of true crime book that I can get behind in the end. But that is everything that I read this week. I will leave it at that. I'd love to hear what you've been up to, watching, reading, whatever. We have been watching a show called The Big Brunch, which is on HBO Max. It's hosted by Daniel Levy from Schitt's Creek. And we've been enjoying that. I think that's really the only new thing we've been watching. And I will leave it at that. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.